Okay. Okay, folks, so let's get started. So we're going to talk now about stocks and flows. We've been talking about causal loop diagrams as ways of capturing our qualitative understanding of how a system works. Now, I should note that system dynamics modeling places a really high emphasis on building models that maybe include factors that we can't measure, but which we believe to be important. The observation is sometimes that, sometimes we'll have a sense of which things are important within a system, but we lack quantitative data for exactly how much they impact things. And there's sort of two schools of thought on how to handle these things. One is to leave those out of models because we don't have reliable data on them. The other is to put them in, but to try to test the model with a wide variety of values for it. And this is sort of a philosophical division between different groups, and you'll find modelers in both camps. System dynamics modelers, most of them tend to err on the side of putting things into the model, just trying them with a wide range of values that may be representative. The argument that's sometimes given for this is that it's true that we may not know exactly how much this is influencing things, but if we leave it out, we may give it we will be giving it the one value, namely zero influence, that we know it doesn't have. So by leaving it out, we're essentially assuming it has zero influence rather than some range of influence. And so we're essentially binding ourselves to a very strong assumption that this is not influencing it at all. Now, the counter-argument is, well, we can use a narrower model as long as we are explicit that we're working within the confines of that narrower model, as long as we're explicit that we're not considering this, that we've left it out, and we've therefore assigned it a value of zero. But generally speaking, you'll find a lot of respect in system dynamics modeling for causal loop diagrams as a way to capture qualitative understanding that's hard to represent in all its details quantitatively. Okay, so qualitative diagrams in the form of causal loop diagrams are by no means second citizen to stocks and flows. But stocks and flow models can be used qualitatively, and they can get us to the point where we can also simulate things quantitatively. And it turns out they capture some information that's just not present within causal loop diagrams. And they can do so at a qualitative level or at a quantitative. And we'll see a little bit of this. I think I've got some slides on qualitative views. We'll have to see. In any case, they're in some of the diagrams or the PowerPoints I provided. Okay, let's go open this model called SIT Model V7. Okay, where is that located? It's, for those of you who are sentimental, you may want to save away your first causal loop diagram there. But otherwise, you can go to System Dynamics, and it's under, if I'm not mistaken, it's under Examples. Here it is, SIT Model 7. Anyone want to say, what does SIT stand for? This is not a model of sitting behavior. What is it? An ergonomic model? Susceptible, infected, and temporarily recovered is what it stands for. Okay, hey, there we have a model. It stands before us. And this model we're going to be doing some little reasoning about. But what you'll see is that it's a different sort of model than what we've been drawing. That causal loop had many virtues to recommend it. But this model, we have some additional types of structure. We've brought additional structure to bear on describing the system. This is still a description of the causal structure, but it adds some elements we just didn't have. It adds new words to our vocabulary. What are those words? They're in the forms of these stocks, in the forms of flows between stocks. And those sharpen what we can describe, qualitatively or quantitatively. Okay? So we'll often integrate causal loop diagrams together with these, what are called system structure diagrams. But we're going to be focusing increasingly on the quantitative side for the duration, the balance of this little session. Okay, so we have here, what do we have here? I mean, roughly speaking, these are stocks. And these stocks represent accumulations. They capture the state of the system at any given moment in time. We have people divided here between three categories, to wit, susceptible individuals, infectious individuals, and temporarily immune individuals. And then these flows lead to people. Well, at any given point, there's a certain number of susceptible, infectious, and temporarily immune. You have people transitioning between them. A certain number of people, say, per month, get infected and go from susceptible to infectious. Or from infected or infectious and they recover. And then some people lose their immunity and become newly susceptible. And then over here, we have another stock that is accumulating the total number of cumulative illnesses over time. It's just accumulating it, totaling up. It's bookkeeping. It keeps on adding them up as the illnesses happen, and accumulating the number of cases over time. So people in the population divided on the stock, and this keeps track of cumulative illnesses. And then we have some things, like up here, this is the total population. It's the sum of this guy and this guy and this guy. We have other things like prevalence of infection. These guys are what are called auxiliary variables. And if we go, and this will be a little bit of a glimpse of what's coming up, and perhaps even of your futures. As you click on, so I got into this equation mode, and I clicked on total population. This is just the sum of infectious plus susceptible plus temporarily immune. Okay? So that's what's called an auxiliary variable. It's just some combination of these other things. Prevalence of infection is similar. Prevalence of infection. What fraction of the entire population is infected? Well, it's just the number of infectious people, infectious stock, keeps track of the number of infectious people divided by the total population. Okay, that's the fraction of prevalence of infection. So we've added words to our vocabulary of describing things. This happens to be a quantitative model. We can do it qualitatively as well. Okay, so when we have these stocks and flows, we have these states, we have these stocks, which sometimes we'll use the word levels for them, or state variables, or compartments. You'll hear all those words out there. You'll hear people talk about compartment models, stocks and flow models. You hear them talk about levels and system dynamics discussions, or state variables and applied mathematics. Stocks, yeah? So these are accumulations. The stocks are accumulations. They capture the state of the system at any given point. Now, critically, because they capture the state, we can measure them at one instant in time. We can measure at a moment in time, freeze things, how many people are susceptible, how many people are infected, how many people are recovered. Okay? Stocks start with some initial value, and then they're changed by flows in and out of them. This is very important. I want to repeat that statement. This is one of the most important statements for you to understand. Stocks start with, in other words, they begin the simulation with some initial value you assign. You have to tell the system at the beginning point of the simulation, we start our model at 1975, and there's this many people susceptible, this many people infected, this many people recovered. After that point, those stocks, the evolution of those stocks over time, those stocks are moving, the model's running out, and those stocks are changing with it. The changes in those stocks are dictated purely by the flows in and out of them. We don't give a formula that says the stock goes in this trajectory. How the stock moves is a function of the flows in and flows out. How many people, say, are becoming infected and how many people are recovering. Right? It's go back to our little model there. The change in this is going to be dictated by that. How many people are coming in here per, say, month? And how many people are leaving here per month? That's what dictates how this changes. That's what dictates. What dictates this is how many people are coming in per month and how many people are leaving per month. Okay? So, the flows, it's kind of a dual relationship. The stocks determine the flows and the flows determine the stocks. At any given time, the flows depend on the stocks for that time. How many people are leaving this temporarily immune thing depends on the number of people that are temporarily immune. If there's no one temporarily immune, no one is going to be losing immunity. If there's no one infectious, no one is going to be getting infected. If there's no one susceptible, no one's going to be getting infected because there ain't no one to infect. Right? So the stocks at a given moment in time determine the value of the flows. And the stock's evolution, its change over time, is determined by these flows in and out. Does that make sense to people? Okay. Okay. So stocks are measured at one instant in time. Start with some initial value or dictated. And they're the source of delay in a system. Stocks have a sort of inertia associated with them. They don't change instantly because the only way they change is by flows. You increase the flow in a big way coming into a stock, the stock's going to change, but it's going to change in a gradual way. It's going to be continuous. It may be going flat. So here we have our stock. Here we have our flow into the stock. And perhaps this is nothing at first. The stock's value is going to be like this. This jumps up to some very high value. Going forward, it's high. So we turn on the water into the bathtub. Start shooting in there. The bathtub has been empty, but what starts to happen? The bathtub starts to rise. But does the bathtub instantly become full? No, it doesn't instantly become full. It doesn't flood our house instantly, thank goodness. It starts to rise up, slowly but gradually. And so it'll be continuous. It'll be flat for a while, empty, and then you start to turn it on, and it'll be rising. Now, if the drain is in there, it'll be rising up well until it starts to overflow. But if the drain is in there, if the drain is unplugged, it'll actually rise up and reach some plateau. We'll see that. But this is all continuous. This doesn't sort of suddenly have discontinuities. Okay? So stocks and flows, they're shown as the rectangles. Examples of stocks. These are things that that have the state of the system at any given moment. You could value at any given moment. People of different categories, amount of medicine that's stocked in some supply room, number of healthcare workers, goods in a warehouse, stored energy in the system, amount of blood sugar in the bloodstream, CO2 in the atmosphere, water in a tub, beds in an emergency room, number of owned vehicles which are circulating, what have you. These are stocks. These may be hard to measure. Number of undiagnosed diabetics, number of asymptomatic gonorrhea people. It may be very hard to measure, but it's out there, and it determines the state of the system. It determines how the system evolves over time. We've said those things can lead to changes in the evolution of the system, and we'll often capture this. Now, in my slide, you wouldn't believe the differences between what I see on my screen and what's here. For those who do this, I'm just going to turn this around. Look at this. I wish you could see the full truth standing before you. But can you see that on your slides? Yeah, it's really unbelievable. It's not showing. But on my slides, these are all highlighted. So these are the stocks there, right? This guy, this guy, this guy, and that guy. Those rectangles.
They're highlighted there too. They're all red.
Sorry? These are, they've got that tinge to them, patina. Okay. So stocks determine the state of the system, and they're central to disequilibrium. They have with build-up and decay of a system, they remember, like the elephant, the stock remembers. You have a hard time changing it instantly. You infect a lot of people with TB, people are going to slowly die off over time, but there's a lot of inertia to the system. In fact, people with herpes, and they will have it for life. Slowly they'll die off, but there's a certain number of people, and it only slowly changes. And these give rise to delays. They lead to a sort of inertia in the system, etc. Flows are a different matter. Okay, so all changes to stocks occurs via flows. Now, flows are always going to be measured, quantified by some unit time. You can, in fact, have a flow in the model, like number of people developing undiagnosed diabetes, which is hard to go observe, but if you were to quantify it, it'll be like people per month or people per year, per what have you. Yeah. So you're always going to have a per unit time of some sort. It could be per second, per year, per month. They measure some quantity, or they quantify some quantity over a certain period of time, like people per year who get infected or who recover, right? So amount of money we get per year, our profit for a year, or our revenue for a year, or our spending for a year. They can be estimated for a point in time, but when we quantify them, it's always something per unit time. So think about incident cases, number of people getting an infection, people per month. It's an example of a flow. There's people recovering per month. Rate of mortality, people per year. Babies per year being born. Rate of treatment, people per day being treated by a system. Rate of caloric consumption, kilocalories per day. These are all per amount of time. Could we estimate them at a given flow of time? Sure. We can go measure the flow of the Saskatchewan River right now. Well, I mean, we could estimate what it is, and we could estimate what it was a month ago and what it will be in midsummer, and we probably find it's a lot more flow right now, cubic meters per second down the South Saskatchewan River. So we can try to, estimate what it is at a given unit of time, but it can change over time. Yeah, but it is something per unit time. It's cubic meters per second past some point, or what have you. Same thing with revenue, same thing with spending rate, etc. If you ask, how much am I spending? I'd have to say, well, in the last month I spent whatever it is, $500. If I said 500, it doesn't make sense. I'm spending 500. Well, over what time? Over my life? Over a short period of time? These things matter. Okay, so you can recognize flows through that. Here are the flows, also in a patina. So these reddish tinge. Okay. Okay. Well, we talked about that. Okay. So how do you distinguish when you think about a quantity? How do you distinguish stock, flow? Well, think about if you were to just consider the state of the system at a given moment in time. Could it be quantified by that, available at that moment? You can go, if you froze the system in time, you'd be able to go count the number of people with certain characteristics, but you're not going to be able to count at that moment in time the rate of which people are getting sick, because at that moment there might be a certain number who are, a certain number who aren't. I guess, if you were to describe it more carefully, you might say that people in the midst of getting sick and quantify some sort of stock there, but fundamentally we can detect the values for flows here. Another way to ask is, if I change the unit of time, from say months to days or from months to years, would the numeric value of this quantity change? If I want to quantify how many cubic meters per second are going down the South Saskatchewan River, if I want to quantify that per day or per month, it would make a huge difference. It's a lot more cubic meters going down per month. Okay, is it an accumulation of different values of other quantities? These are some sort of points of hint, and I have a little exercise that we go through, and generally we can end up, pinning down stocks and flows from that. We don't have time to go through that now. Okay, so we have flows and stocks. This is what it looks like in a causal loop diagram. You can see there's a lot more structure here. Among other things, here, if this increases very quickly, this can't jump up. This could jump up. This can't. That's not communicated in this alone. Okay, so here's our flow. It's at 10 into our stock, starts at 0, the stock rises linearly. How if we lower this to 5 units a month? So this is 5, let's suppose 5 people getting infected per month. This is the number of people who have herpes, lifelong disease. So suppose we were to lower this to 5 per month. What would the consequence be? Okay, so yeah, here in the middle it was 10, now we go to 5, it'll rise, but it'll rise less quickly, right? Still having flow in. It's like turning down the flow into my tub. Instead of going, it goes like, so it's turned down. It's still rising, it's just rising less quickly. No outflow here. No outflow yet. Okay, right, we're not going to have time to go through this. Okay, so we'll go through and reason. Maybe, do I have something? Oh man, I was hoping I had something more. Okay, I'm going to have to add something there on more stuff on sort of stock and flow reasoning. Because it's actually really nice if you want to think through the implications of different flows into a stock. Okay, so the other type of variable I want to introduce, though, is what I call auxiliary variables. So these are convenience names we give for concepts that can be defined in terms of other concepts already in the model. So let's go look at that model. Where's an auxiliary variable? Who could point one out to me? Yeah, there we go. Right? Right there. It's auxiliary. It just adds together this, and that. Right? Yeah. Okay. So what's really important here is that this is just a convenience name for the sum of these other things. This total population, this thing here, oops, I meant to do this guy here. This guy here is just the sum of this plus this plus this. It's just the name we give to that expression. And we can end up reusing it because of that, and like prevalence of infection. But we could have just as easily, it wouldn't have been as clear, but in prevalence of infection, instead of writing over total population, we could have just replaced it with that formula. That stock plus that stock plus that stock. It would have been the same mathematically. Yeah. So these are convenience names we give for computations of quantities. And they can be reused in many places. We can use total population once we've defined it to compute fractional prevalence. We could also use it to compute the number of people who have been infected, whether they're infected now or previously infected. By subtracting the total population, you subtract the number of susceptible, etc. You have a single place to define it, and it's comfortable for reporting. Okay? So here are some auxiliary variables in red. They were supposed to be in red. Okay. And then we can have model constants and time series that we define, like these guys here. The initial population. The probability of transmission between a susceptible and an infective given contact. Okay? Mean contacts per year. Okay. Okay, we don't have time to go through this. Okay, so it's worth emphasizing that in some models you can have people divided into these categories here, but you may have many different sorts of things. So this is the Karen E model, where we have birds up here. We have mosquitoes down here at various stages of maturation, birds at stages of maturation and infection, mosquito stages of maturation and infection, and humans down here. So humans go between these stages, mosquitoes between these stages, and, humans here, birds here, and mosquitoes here. And never do you have, obviously, a person flowing into mosquito stuff. That would be uncomfortable. But you have them flowing within their each little state. So stocks and flows within each state. Okay. So Nabokov aside, or was that was what's his name? No, I don't think it was Nabokov. It was another one. Okay, here's a system stock diagram. So sometimes we combine these stocks and flows with components of causal loop diagrams, where we have lengths, polarity shown, etc. And these are causal loop polarities. And sometimes we can combine these two. So this is what's called system structure diagram, where we have a set of these variables in a causal loop linked to up with sets of flows here. So you can combine them in qualitative ways. Okay, so I have a little exercise I'd like you to go through now. Well, actually, let's first do this. These are these steps I was looking for earlier. So suppose we have a stock like this. Okay, so we have people without diabetes, people with diabetes, and incident cases here. Here are deaths of people with diabetes and deaths without diabetes. Okay, suppose we start with 1,000 as the variables, and we have 15 people developing diabetes every time unit, let's suppose every year, and no one dying. Okay. Okay. So let's go see. Okay. So let's suppose we look at diabetes here. So this is deaths of people with. Okay. So here we have incident cases of diabetes. So that's this one here is 15. And let's suppose we have deaths of people with diabetes, 10 here. How is the stock going to change over time? We have 15 coming in. We have 10 going out here. Sorry, that was 10. This is going to be increasing by how many per year? 5, that's right. So if these are the flows, 15 in, 10 out, it's going to be going up at 5 per year. That's right. Let's suppose these 15 in goes down. What is the stock going to do as a result? This is the outflow. This is the inflow. It goes from a higher value to a lower value here. What's the stock going to do? Yeah? Like that. Irene anticipates it exactly. Suppose we have these flows. Oh boy, this is a little. Remember this? Okay, so what is this? Maybe we'll leave this for another time. In the interest of question. Okay, but let me ask this: when is the stock of people with diabetes at its highest value? So this is diabetes flows. This is outflow and inflow. When is the number of people with diabetes at its highest value? Again, blue is outflow, red is inflow.
See where the blue meets the red down there?
This
No,
one?
The other one.
You have taken my class, and you have remembered my class. Congratulations.
Not bad.
And how? Yeah, so why is that? A lot of people, and by the way, this includes some highly trained people in science, technology, and engineering at prestigious institutions of higher learning, who will associate this with the highest value of the stock. Why is it not this? Why is it that?
Because the stock's been increasing throughout that.
Yeah, throughout this entire time. Do you want to finish the statement? The end?
And then at the intersection, it's at equilibrium, so that's where inflow and outflow equals. So then once it goes below the blue line,
That's right.
outflow exceeds inflow, and the stock starts to decrease.
That's right. So it's at its, okay, so it's at its greatest value here. When is it at its lowest value? The end? Yeah, that's right. So it actually is, so for this period, is it going down or up?
Sorry, the value of the stock.
The value of the stock, is it?
It's going down, though, that's quickly.
Okay. Because here we have outflow exceeding inflow. This is the way to think about it, right? So outflow is exceeding inflow. It's just exceeding it less and less strongly, but it's exceeding inflow. So it's got to be going down at first, and then at this point it's what? Outflow equals inflow, so the stock is doing nothing. And then over here, what's the stock doing? During all this period, it's increasing. During this period, it's increasing faster and faster because the gap between them is highest. The net flow in is highest here. It's getting, the net flow is getting larger and larger. Here it's still increasing, but it's decreasing slower and slower. After this, what is it doing? I am so proud of you folks. Man, I should give you a prize or something. Okay, so it's decreasing at first. It rises faster and faster. Then it rises slower and slower. It reaches its maximum, and then it decreases. That's the value of the stock. This is not an easy thing to think through for people, who are new to this, and even for people who've been at it for a while. So it really takes a little bit of careful thinking as to things. Okay, yes.
At the System Dynamics winter camp, when John was showing this,
Yeah.
there was staunch silence in the crowd because you could tell everyone was trying to think through those.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
Right, so you did System Dynamics as well.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so folks, I'd like you to let's create a little thing here. Let's create people with virulent infection. Gosh, I should have a better example. This is really grim, I'm sorry. This would be like, let's make this people who are ill and recovery from infection, okay? So let's make it nicer. I feel bad having such a grim stock. Okay, so we're going to do File, New Model. Do we want to save that? No. Okay. Okay, for now, just leave this as it is. Okay, so how do I do this? I go into Vensim, and I'm going to select here, box variable, click here, okay, and I'm going to do people, people, I could say ill people or people with illness. I mean, I'm not particular about the name. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to click. Okay, so hey, folks, did you see that? So I put down that box. How did I put down that box? Can anyone say I'm going to kill it and just so you can see it again? Watch this. See that? I clicked on that. Box variable, that's a level. That's a stock, in other words, a compartment. Pick your term. So I clicked on that, and then I click here. It's waiting for the name. And I could say ill people, right? Okay. And then how do I do a flow out of it? I click here. So that's the flow. Then I click on this, and I stretch over here and click. And this is people recovering. So what does this mean? Well, it bears an undue resemblance to Australia minus the Cape York Peninsula. What it actually represents is sort of something outside the model. We're not going to keep track of what happens to them after they flow outside that model. Okay, so folks, we've just drawn that, and then I'm going to ask you to actually put in a mean time until recovery. We're trying to make this less morbid. So mean time until recovery. Okay? Okay? Mean time until recovery? So how did I do that? I clicked over here, this variable here, and I clicked here, mean time until recovery. Yeah? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this arrow and connect it up to people recovering. And I'm going to connect ill people up to people recovering. Why am I connecting those? Can anyone tell me? There's a reason I'm connecting those. What does that tell me? What's that?
Other than the mathematical function of it?
Well, what does it tell me without even looking at the details of this? What does it tell me if I see an arrow from this to this to it? What does it tell me? Yeah, people recovering depends on mean time to recovery, and it depends on ill people, the number of ill people. After all, why would it depend on ill people? Why would the rate at which the number of people recovering per month, why would that depend on the number of people that are ill? How do we know? Give me a simple argument that it's got to depend on it.
If people are not ill, then they wouldn't be recovering.
Yeah, exactly. If there ain't anyone ill, no one's going to be recovering from illness, right? So it's got to depend on that. And as far as the mean time until recovery, if they're going to recover faster, you're going to have, you have a bunch of ill people. They're going to be, the flow is going to be out. Flow leaving that stock. The number of people recovering is going to be larger than if it takes a really long time to recover. Like if they never recover, this is infinitely long. No one's going to be recovering. So it's got to depend on both. Okay, how do I make it depend? I put an arrow from both of those. This got to that got to that. How am I going to put a formula in there? Well, I'm going to go to this equations. And when I click on that, it looks a bit scary. Because now it's all black. But let's fill this in. Stay with it. Don't be disheartened. So all we have to do is fill three things in. What are the three things we have to fill in? Does anyone want to take a guess?
How many
At the beginning. And then a formula for this and a formula for that. That's why it's complaining. That's why it's unhappy. So it's very easy to make it happy. Let's put 1,000 here. Okay? How do I do that? How do I tell it its initial value of this is 1,000? By the way, why do I only have to specify the initial value? Why don't I have to tell it the value of this at all different times? Because the value of this depends on what? This flow. So it depends on this flow, right? Okay, so watch this. So I click this for equations. I click on this, and I'm going to put it a value of 1,000. Okay. I could have actually declared a variable called initial value, typed in 1,000, and made that depend on that. But for simplicity, I've done that. Okay, so that's the initial value of that. After that, you'll notice it depends on the integral of this. What that means is it's accumulating sort of that, it's accumulating that over time, that net flow. In this case, it's flow out. Okay, so what's another thing I have to specify? I have to specify this mean time until recovery. And I think I said in my little thing here, I didn't specify it, but let's make it 10, okay? Mean time to recovery of 10. Okay? And then people recovering. Now this is going to be something that involves both of these. We know that. There's no one to recover, no one's going to be recovering, and if it's longer mean time to recover, it's going to be fewer of them. So it turns out, now this is based on something we don't have time to go into in this little session in detail, but this is what's called a first order delay. And suffice to say, if there's no ill people, there's no one that's going to be recovering. The longer the time to recovery is, the lower this number of recovery per month is going to be. So it's ill people divided by the mean time, okay? If you double the time to recovery, there's going to be half as many people coming out at any given time. Okay, now that's all. Folks, it's now a happy camper. We can actually run this. How do we run this model? Well, we're going to use a button as well. Okay, first of all, we need to understand, in order to run this, we need to understand that when we run a simulation, we give it a name. Okay? We give our simulations names. We give them names because we want to remember what they describe. We want to give it a name that has a little bit of meaning to it. And then we can change the name and describe different situations. So I'm going to give it the name baseline here. Okay? See up that? Baseline? Yeah? And that's going to be the name of the simulation. I'm going to be able to view that simulation later, the results of that simulation. I'm going to be able to go back and view it later. Okay? Go back and compare it to other results. I'm going to run one simulation with one assumption and another simulation with another assumption. Then I can compare the results. Okay.
So excuse me, you think baseline, you are thinking the symbols for button?
It's kind of the default situation. Is kind of why I'm using that. It's kind of a reference case.
And
where,
then you upgrade gradually with more variables.
yeah, or I might change the values from the default value that I'm starting with. Like this mean time until recovery, I made it 10. Maybe I can make it 20, and then I could call that one, alternative with mean time to recovery equal 20. And I can compare many, many different runs with this baseline, just as a point of reference. It gives me, it's not particularly privileged point of reference, but it's one point of reference. So we've given this guy the name, and we happen to have chosen the name baseline. How do we run it? We run it, see this running guy just to the right of this box here? See that? We run it, okay? Watch. We press him, and it says, do I want to save the sketch? Sure. So I'm going to just say in class flow, stock and flow. Okay? Okay, it just ran it. Okay. It just ran this thing. So how am I going to then see the results? Well, I ran it, and so if I double click on ill people, see that, double click on it, and actually see up here it says ill people up at the top of the screen? Now I can go over here and I can do graph, and that's the number of ill people over time. It's decreasing like that. Okay? Started at 1,000, comes down really quickly at first. Why is it coming down quicker at first?
Because we have a lot of people in this.
Yeah, there's a lot of people there, and so there's a lot of people who can recover. And in fact, this is for ill people. If we look at the number of people recovering, what we'll actually see there is that's also coming, they're recovering, the rate at which people are recovering. Oops, sorry, I didn't click on that properly. Here we go. Double click. Oops. Hey, people recover. There, see that? People recover. Click on that. That's similar, but this is like 100 people per month. That's how to read that. This is a flow, people recovering, so it's 100 people per month initially, and then it comes down, so there's more people who can recover, and so more do recover, but then over time, there were fewer and fewer people left to still recover, and so fewer and fewer people recover. Okay, but we can also change this, and this is where we could actually make use of another thing. So I'm going to say alternative here, okay? Well, let's, yeah, sure. So we're going to just say alternative, and we can press. See this guy he had a bunch of wind on him. See that? See this guy? Yeah. Okay. So now I can actually change here, sort of live. Okay. Suppose I want to change the mean time to recovery to be 20. Okay. How does that change the number of ill people? And I can just press it, and now I can go actually hover over this, and I could see. Okay. Number of ill people. The first time it came down in the red line. See, it says baseline, and this is comparing that with the alternative where I had the mean time to recovery of 20. Yeah. Alternatively, I could say, suppose I want. By the way, I click here. See that? And I can do 5 in here. I can click here, and now the alternative is actually this guy here. You see ill people?
Can you go a little bit slow for
Sure.
changing the numbers? Sorry.
Sure. Here we go. So you're seeing something like this,
Yes.
right? So you actually click here. Just like click on that actual arrow, and you can type in whatever number you want.
Where?
So you just type it in right here. Oh, can you not? Yeah. See that? And that will then run it automatically. Or I could say, for example, 25, and that will run it out. You notice each time I press enter, it's actually rerunning the model. And I can go check the result here in ill people. See that? Anyone else need help with that? Okay. So the alternative is, so that lets us change assumptions. Another way we could have changed the assumption is we could have gone in manually, equations, mean time to recovery. We could have changed this to 20, right? And we could say alternative with recovery time equals 20. That's just the name of it. Press enter, and now it runs it. And now we have a thing there, one where recovery time equals 20, one with recovery time equals 10, the baseline, and then this guy here, which is with 25, sort of just the alternative I was experimenting with. So there we changed it here manually, and we could run it just using this. So we can rerun the simulation, compare results, okay? So this is a little model that we've built up. So okay, so we don't have time to go into here. Okay, it's worth remembering here that stocks can serve as accumulations. Okay, so if we just have a flow coming into a stock and there's nothing leaving the stock, there's no flows leaving the stock, that stock will simply accumulate the value of that flow over time. In mathematical terms, it will integrate it. Okay, so if we have a current population size and we're measuring time in years, feeding that into this flow here will accumulate the total cumulative life years lived in the population. Imagine we had one person and they're living the entire length of time of 100 years. Rip Van Winkle. Then we have cumulative life years lived of 100 cumulative person years or life years. One person living 100 years. Alternatively, if we had 100 people who died within the first year and nobody else, we have 100 life years lived as well. And so sometimes we want to accumulate these things. Or imagine this is, the cost per month, and this is cumulative costs over time. Accumulate our costs or cumulative revenues or what have you. Okay? So if we have a population of size P, after 1 year, the stock holds 1 times P. After 2 years, it holds 2 times P. After 3 years, it holds 3 times P, right? If we had a population of constant size, this would just accumulate the number of life years lived by that population. With a change in P, it integrates P. So does that make sense to people? That this accumulates, this thing? Another example, patients in sanatoria. This is cumulative patient sanatoria years. Sanatoria patient years. So these are the patients in the sanatoria at a given time, running it out over years, say 10 years. This changes over time, maybe. And this accumulates the number of sanitary patient years. Okay. I think in the interest of time, we're going to go light in this, but suffice it to say that when we're building models with health economic components, we want to do cost effectiveness analysis, or when we want to do, we want to analyze the savings in terms of life years saved by an intervention. Sometimes we're also interested in quality of life. adding not only life to years, but years to, not in years to life, but life to years, as the WHO said. So if we have a subpopulation, there's a certain quality of life for that subpopulation. We can have a quality of life weighted subpopulation, which is the size of the subpopulation becomes the quality of life for it. Same thing with another subpopulation. You sort of add that in here, and we have the new number of quality-adjusted life years lived, and this is cumulative quality-adjusted life years lived. So we can actually take into account quality of life in weighing the benefits of an intervention. If an intervention keeps people alive, but it doesn't keep them alive at a good quality of life, that's considered less beneficial than an intervention that keeps them alive at a very high quality of life. So we can have models which take those sort of things into effect. Okay, so look, this is an important point that draws on our understanding of Stokes and flow and causal diagrams. We said, when it came to causal diagrams, that the feedback structure, the Stokes and flow structure of a diagram determines possible patterns of behaviors. I talked about exponential changes. I talked about balancing loops. I talked about oscillations. So the possible behaviors are determined by that structure. Different sets of particular parameters will determine particular behaviors within it. Do you folks see, may I ask, do you folks see a certain pattern for this? Does anything look kind of similar among these three patterns? I mean, these aren't wildly different, right? This one isn't zigzagging all over the place, while this one zips up exponentially and comes down. These are pretty similar shapes, right? They're pretty similar shapes. Differences are in the details about how quickly they come down exactly. They're similar. Why are they similar? Can anyone identify something that would yield that sort of behavior here? Speak on. Or at least speak. So if I draw this stock, and I have this flow out, I'm going to call this R for recovery, so I don't have to write that. And this is the number of people, okay? Yeah? So how does the number of people here in this stock, how does that influence R? If I were to draw this out using a causal loop sort of thing, how does the number of people here affect that? If I want to attach a plus or a minus, if there are more people here, is this increased or decreased compared to what it would have been? So if I have more people, is this flow out, recovered flow, people recovering, is that increased or decreased compared to what it would have otherwise been? So if I have 0 people here, how many people are going out? Big 0. If I increase this to 100 people, are more people going out than when there were 0 people here? How about if I increase this to 1,000 people? Are there more people? Keeping the mean time to recovery constant, are there more people coming out with 1,000 people than there are with 100? I would argue that as you increase the population that can recover, the number of people, all of the things being equal, the number of people recovering will increase. Right? Okay, now, let's complete the loop. There's a loop here. There's a hidden loop. There's a hidden loop here.
I'm wondering what about people that die, you know.
Okay, we can add that in. That's an issue with the scope of the model. We can add that in. Let's complete this analysis, and I like your way of thinking. So we'll come to that in just a minute here.
It's good thinking is doing 5 o'clock, so it means very productive, yeah?
So we have this here. How does this guy influence this guy? If we have to express this as a loop. Does this guy influence this guy? Does this change this guy compared to what it otherwise would have been? This flow out? Okay. So if we're drawing this as a causal loop diagram, P would, we said that this would increase R. Tell me, if this guy influences that, what's the polarity associated with it? If the flow out increases, does it increase or decrease this compared to the stock, compared to what it would have been? Decreases. This is a negative feedback. It's hidden because it's kind of in this flow out. There's a negative feedback right there. It stands before us, just waiting for our discovery of it, like all good, great scientific discoveries. So there's a negative feedback here. And what is the behavior characteristic of a negative feedback? The dynamic behavior. Does anyone remember? Sorry? Yeah, it leads to an equilibrium. Remember that? It leads to, remember we said that it's stable. It's stable. It will lead to some equilibrium value. Now maybe it leads to a zero equilibrium value. Sometimes it will lead to, a non-zero equilibrium. But a disturbance of the system away from it will get it pulled back to this equilibrium. This is in contrast to an unstable situation which will diverge, which will just grow and grow and grow. This will pull it back to an equilibrium. And that's what we're observing here, folks. I mean, the fact that this is being, hey, come on. This is being pulled down to that. There's no accident. There's a negative feedback involved. If you add people to ill people, it's going to pull it back to this equilibrium. It's a stable situation, and those different parameter values were just showing different sort of examples of that. Okay. Okay. I think it's time for a break. We started a bit late, but I don't want to go too late. So can we keep it to 5 minutes this time? Is that okay? Okay, great. And so we're going to go on now. We're going to take probably a little bit of a look at infectious disease, and we'll try to call it a day. Okay?